Good morning. As the world remembers Pope Francis, who was someone who disagreed with the Trump administration's handling of migrants. However, Vice President J.D. Vance did get a short meeting with the pontiff yesterday at the Vatican, as Vance wanted to be there for Easter ceremonies and services. The Supreme Court early Saturday morning effectively halted another round of deportations to El Salvador of alleged gang members. The court did not figure out how it might rule on the use of the Alien Enemies Act to summarily deport detainees from Venezuela and El Salvador accused of being Tren de Aragua or MS-13 gang members. Justices Thomas and Alito objected to the intervention. President Trump believes he can use the Alien Enemies Act as justification for not allowing detainees to challenge their deportations. And the flight that was scheduled for Saturday morning was lined up in hopes that it could be done before some kind of court intervention. The buses were on their way to the airport in Texas. It seems the Supreme Court will have to decide eventually if non-citizens who are being sent quickly to El Salvador have a right to some kind of due process. On ABC's This Week, White House border czar Tom Homan arguing no.
The length of due process is not the same under the Alien Enemies Act. That's why the Alien Enemies Act was created. President Trump invoked the authorities he had of the Alien Enemies Act.
Homan said the length of due process. Critics would suggest there's no process at all for the alleged gang members. That's all separate from the case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, an El Salvadoran native who was, according to the administration, mistakenly sent with two plane loads in the first go-round to the notorious prison, but an alleged gang member nonetheless, according to the administration. Fresh off of meeting with Abrego Garcia, who was transferred to another prison apparently, Maryland Senator Chris Van Hollen telling CBS's Face the Nation.
This is not a case about just one man whose constitutional rights are being ignored and disrespected. Because when you trample on the constitutional rights of one man, as the courts have all said is happening in this case, you threaten the constitutional rights of every American.
The administration is asking the Supremes to withdraw their hold on the flights quickly, despite a hint in a previous ruling that the majority of the justices believe summary deportation may be unconstitutional. He may be in hot water again, and President Trump may not care. The New York Times reports there was a second Signal app text thread with Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth that also delivered details about the planned attacks on Houthi targets. But the second thread was with his wife, lawyer, and brother. That was the same day, according to the Times, that Hegseth's Signal messages to administration officials about the timing of the attacks also mistakenly included a journalist. And when people ask, I make a point of saying the most important thing to do in covering the Trump White House, as it was in the first term, is context and fact-checking. Example, on Friday, to quote the president,
prices are down. Gasoline yesterday in 3 states hit $1.98 a gallon.
Well, being an intrepid reporter, or an average citizen, I looked up AAA's national gasoline price map, and there is not a single state in the country where the price of a gallon of regular is that low. With ear on the White House, I'm Bob Costantini.